So today's perfumer is somebody who really became famous through formulating a celebrity fragrance that became a huge hit worldwide. Somebody who really rejuvenated that whole genre and started a whole new trend in perfumery. Also somebody who has had some standout designer fragrance hits, and somebody who Quentin Bisch credits with having taught him things about perfumery. They often work together to create designer fragrances. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about Louise Turner. So before we start, this video is part of a series about perfumers and their lives and their creations. And I've already profiled several perfumers in this series, including Quentin Bisch, Francis Kurkdjian, Dominique Robillon, Jérôme Epinette, and also Olivia Cresp. So if you are interested and you do want to check out those videos, I will leave them linked in the description box below in case you are interested. But also, if you haven't seen me before, I'm Claire Smith. I make videos all about fragrance. I talk about perfume history, perfume science, and I also just do some straight perfume reviews as well. So if that kind of thing interests you, and if you like this video, then please do consider subscribing, and please also press the like button. So today's videos are all about Louise Turner. So Louise Turner was born in Kent, England, yet she's an English perfumer, which is highly unusual in the world of big brand perfumery. But yeah, she was born in Kent in the 1970s, early 1970s. I can't find an exact date. And her father worked as a chemist. She says that her earliest fragrance memories are really revolving around her father. She says that he was a smoker and he also used to make things out of wood. So she associates the smells of cigarettes, of sawdust and wood with her dad. Louise Turner's initial planned career was not perfumery. She really wanted to be a dentist. She applied for a dentistry degree and got a place to study dentistry in London. She went there and she just decided that this wasn't her chosen career path. This wasn't for her, and she ended up dropping out in the first year. In those months of trying to decide where her life was going and what she was going to do next, she looked into other career paths and she decided that she wanted to be an environmental scientist. So she applied for a degree in environmental science. That degree wasn't starting for another 10 months. She needed to fill her time. So she got a temporary position with Quest International, which no longer exists. It's been taken over by Givaudan, which is a massive perfume company. But Quest International at the time was huge in the world of perfumery and of flavour chemistry as well. And she ended up working in the marketing department of Quest International. Over the time she was there, she began to understand that perfumery was an option as a career. She'd never thought about it before, but it struck her as something that interested her. And Turner says, after making a nuisance of myself and of passing lots of smelling tests and interviews, Quest offered me a job as a trainee perfumer. She began studying at Quest in 1991 under the tutelage of a perfumer called Alain Garossi. Turner credits him with having taught her the basic principles of perfumery. After 3 years of training, Louise moved to the Netherlands, where she spent a year working, and then in 1996 she moved to France. And really, she's never left. She's been working for Quest International and then later for Givaudan since then. Initially, she didn't work on perfumes per se, she worked on ingredients. So she was working on fine fragrance ingredients for several years before she formulated her first fragrances in around 2001. So her first fragrances really weren't too much of a commercial success, but the first ones were Chaumet L'Eau. That was a female marketed tea and mimosa fragrance. There was also a male marketed fragrance for Trussardi called Python, and that was a cypress and aquatic green fig fragrance. And then finally there was a unisex fragrance, this time for Versace, called Versus Time to Relax. And that sounds so incredibly unusual. I've never before seen avocado listed as a note in a fragrance, but it's in that fragrance. So sadly, all of those are long gone, but one of her creations from 2002 lives on. And it was so successful that it really blew up an entire genre of fragrance and still is something that people talk about today. So in 2002, Louise Turner formulated J.Lo's Glow. It was one of those serendipitous releases that was perfectly timed. Jennifer Lopez was a huge star at the pinnacle of her career at the time. The price point was right for this fragrance. There was a gap in the market And really, at the time, celebrity fragrances were things that had been marketed towards older women. If you think about the earlier fragrances like Elizabeth Taylor's lines and also Cher's lines, they weren't marketed to teens and 20-somethings, whereas Jennifer Lopez's fragrance was marketed towards a younger audience. The most important thing about J-Lo's fragrance was that the fragrance itself fitted with people's ideas of Jennifer Lopez. People could spray this on and imagine Jennifer Lopez wearing this fragrance. It was a believable fragrance, and that meant that people could buy a little piece of J-Lo to take home with them, and that really contributed to its success. So Glow is essentially quite a soapy fragrance, and Louise Turner formulated this based on a kind of guide from Jennifer Lopez. Jennifer Lopez particularly loved one type of soap, and she wanted a fragrance that reflected clean skin, something that smelled of this soap. Turner created that vision with florals, soft florals, and also soapy musks and sandalwood to add some creaminess. The bottle was said to be based on Jennifer Lopez's body, and that's why it's so shapely. And also the bottle was adorned with a diamante necklace to try to emulate something that J-Lo herself would wear. The whole thing, the whole package just fitted perfectly with Jennifer Lopez's image. So this fragrance really surprised the industry. The industry were expecting this new celebrity line to be a flop. They did not expect this to be successful. This perfume actually had sales of over $100 million in its first year, and by 2004, just 2 years after its release, it was actually taking in $300 million in sales. At the time, it was the biggest selling fragrance on the US market, and it sold out in several outlets, including Macy's. I never owned a bottle of this one, but I remember very distinctively going with a friend to purchase this for his girlfriend. And I remember thinking, oh, this is fancy, because I was quite young at the time. I remember thinking, oh, this is fancy, because, you know, to me it was a very expensive gift to be giving your girlfriend. And I felt really like, oh, she's very lucky that this person's buying this fragrance for her. And actually, 22 years later, those two people are now married. So clearly that was a great gift. So in 2007, Louise Turner went on to formulate several fragrances for Mugler, and she would really formulate fragrances for Mugler throughout her career. But it started off with one that I used to own called Eau de Star. Eau de Star is a really interesting and unusual combination. When you think about how Angel actually smells, you think of heavy patchouli. This is very much an upside down Angel. So you get the patchouli first, and then you get a honeyed watermelon as it begins to dry down. It's a more summery version of Angel, really, essentially, but clearly takes it in a very different direction. Louise Turner has formulated several flankers since, and I will talk about a few more later in the video. So in 2010, Louise Turner went on to formulate a fragrance that I don't hear talked about very much anymore because it's been discontinued. But this one I think truly was loved, and really its namesake, because its name was also Love. So Love was a powdery purple floral fragrance. Pretty much every purple floral you can think of is in that fragrance. So there's wisteria, there's hyacinth, there's lilac, there's heliotrope, there's iris. In interviews, Louise Turner has particularly highlighted how much she loves the smell of lilac, and how when she was growing up she was surrounded by it in Kent. I actually bought a bottle of Chloe Love for a friend, and I was really quite taken aback by how nice this was. It's really a very powdery but sweet and even slightly fruity purple floral fragrance. It's just something very distinctive, something you don't smell all the time in perfumery, and something that is becoming rarer and rarer. I think this one was really loved, and it's very hard to find these days, but if you come across it, it's well worth trying. So that's Chloe Love. In 2012, Louise Turner formulated a new fragrance for Roberto Cavalli. So Roberto Cavalli's eponymous fragrance, the EDP, was launched in 2012, and I remember going to try this in a store and being astounded that something so inexpensive could smell so good. And I think this is really where Louise Turner shines. She works for brands usually with reasonably low price points, and yet she still makes standout designer fragrances. So Roberto Cavalli's EDP is based around orange blossom, but it's also a really strong ambery vanilla fragrance. It really feels quite decadent and quite golden, and actually I think the Nero Assoluto flanker fragrance that came out a year or so later was even more popular than the original fragrance. That was apparently a woodier and oodier version of the original, with the orange blossom swapped out for orchid. Sadly, I never got to smell it. So in 2013, Louise Turner moved on to formulating a fragrance for Maison Margiela. She formulated their 5th fragrance in their replica line, which was doing incredibly well after its initial releases. So she formulated Lazy Sunday Morning, which is a fragrance that I think is actually one of their best artistically. It really does give you the feeling of crisp white sheets. It gives you the feeling of sunshine streaming through a window. It just really captures that kind of moment, which is what that replica line is all about. Turner says that she wanted to give the impression of something white in her composition. She wanted something virginal, luminous and clean. So to give that impression, she designed the fragrance around musks, and she added in a light pink rose to add some softness. She also added in aldehydes to add a clean feel, but also a luminosity. The fragrance is interesting because it both feels minimalistic but also enveloping and comforting. It's a great balance that captures exactly what it was setting out to do. Louise Turner describes working for Maison Margiela as something she really enjoyed. She says the best of both worlds between designer and niche. While it is still a designer fragrance house, it's one that gives perfumers more freedom to do what they want with their fragrances, and she said she felt that. She also just really appreciated the fact that this fragrance house is a designer house because it gave her more exposure. The market was bigger for this fragrance and really her talents were appreciated. This fragrance did well. Following her success with Lazy Sunday Morning, in 2014, she returned to Maison Margiela and made a second fragrance. This time it was one called At the Barber's, which is a fragrance that weirdly always makes me think of my dad's wool dressing gown when I was growing up. I would often wear this wool dressing gown. It just completely takes me back to childhood, and for that reason I appreciate that fragrance, even if it's not something I personally would want to wear. I think that fragrance is clever because it really does capture so well the idea of being at the Barber's, and I think the replica line of fragrances is a line that truly suits Louise Turner's style. So in 2015, following the success of Roberto Cavalli's EDP, Louise Turner returned to Roberto Cavalli and formulated a second pillar fragrance for the brand. She formulated Paradiso, which is a jasmine and citrus fragrance. And I don't think the original pillar was a huge commercial success, but I believe that the flankers were very popular. I remember seeing lots of videos all about those flankers on YouTube, and the one that I think stood out to most people was Gemma de Paradiso. Also in 2015, Turner produced a fragrance for Jimmy Choo. I actually owned this one. It was called Blossom. So Blossom is a fragrance that smells to me like a freeze-dried raspberry. It's got a powderiness, but also a sweetness and a huge hit of raspberry. It's something that also has some citrus and just has this lovely rose and a musk in the dry down. It's pretty, it's simple, it's uplifting, and as with a lot of Louise Turner fragrances, is also affordable. So in 2016, Louise Turner produced one of her biggest fragrance hits, and she did this alongside Quentin Bisch. Her and Bisch seem to have a very good and positive working relationship. They often work together on fragrances. They both work at Givaudan. And actually Turner seems to have an immense fondness for Bisch and describes him as the best. So according to Louise, Good Girl was a surprise hit. It was a fragrance that was originally only meant to be marketed towards a Spanish, South American and Russian audience, but because it was so successful in those locations, it was marketed worldwide. Louise Turner says that she's travelled more for Good Girl than for any other fragrance line, and that's because Good Girl quickly became one of the world's top-selling fragrances. In its first year, it took in $200 million in sales. This fragrance has an awful lot going on. If you look at the notes, there are really quite a few, but the things that stand out to me are the things that make this powdery. So this is primarily the tonka and the vanilla, but also the coffee, and of course the cocoa alongside that powdery almond too. The bottle, of course, was also very distinctive, and love it or loathe it, it's something that's really enabled the fragrance to be instantly recognisable. In preparation for this video, I did count up the different flankers and limited editions, and I counted 27. So I can see why Louise Turner has spent so much time travelling for this fragrance. Turner says of Good Girl that really the core of it is the simple base of jasmine and tonka. She says that it's a very contrasted fragrance and it's powerful, and she credits its success to a combination of a good name, a good fragrance, in a good bottle, marketed the right way and with a good dose of luck. Good Girl actually won a Breakout Star Award at the Fragrance Foundation Awards in 2020, and next year will mark 10 years since its original release. I think Good Girl must be Carolina Herrera's best-selling fragrance to date. So clearly a good chunk of Louise Turner's time has probably been dedicated to formulating several of those flanker fragrances, but also in 2018 she formulated a few other fragrances for various other houses. So for example, she formulated Nina Ricci's Bella, which is a rhubarb fragrance. She also formulated this one for Hugo Boss, which was a scent for her Private Accord. And this was really a sleeper hit. It was something that was a hit really a few years after it had been released. It became a hit, I think, through social media. This one was a very distinctive gourmand fragrance, and I actually sprayed the dregs of this. This is an empty bottle, but I sprayed the dregs on me just before making this video, and I was really astounded by how much I still like this one. It's a powdery, cocoa-y, almost chocolatey orange kind of scent. And it really stands out as something very different, something you don't really smell nowadays. But yeah, a delicious one. So that's the scent for her Private Accord. Her next big hit was for Tom Ford. So at the time, Tom Ford were not a brand that were really known for gourmand fragrances or fruity fragrances, and Louise Turner's composition broke that mould and smashed their sales records. So she created Lost Cherry for the brand, and this was really based around Tom Ford's own idea of cherry. Tom Ford's vision of cherry was something indulgent, luxurious, sensual and decadent, and that really translated into Lost Cherry perfectly. As with a lot of Tom Ford names, Lost Cherry is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It's something that's a bit cheeky and a bit playful, but it's really a fragrance that takes cherry to the max. It dips cherries in amaretto, it references sticky cherries like maraschino cherries, but also features dark black cherries as well. It was a cherry many ways paired with almonds and with woods. It was distinctive, addictive, lovable, and it felt like a guilty pleasure kind of fragrance, which is exactly what Tom Ford wanted. Lost Cherry is something that's been copied over and over again, and it's something as well that really kicked off a bit of a cherry trend in 2020 and 2021. We wouldn't have seen that explosion in cherry fragrances without Lost Cherry. Louise Turner says of working with Tom Ford that working with him has been a privilege, and that she's happy that Lost Cherry was the first fruity fragrance that he accepted into his brand. Following Lost Cherry, Turner began to work more with niche brands, and in 2019 she produced Lust in Paradise with Ex Nihilo. This fragrance features Petalia, and if you've watched my fragrance video on Bisch's creations, you will understand that Petalia is a Givaudan trademarked ingredient, and it's something that lots of perfumers at Givaudan were really pushing and using in their compositions at the time. So Lust in Paradise is actually widely compared to Delina, and that's unsurprising because of this use of Petalia. In 2019 also, Louise Turner reworked Angel EDT. She reformulated it, adding in apple, making it brighter and more modern. Whilst the EDT does retain a nod to the original EDP, it feels more wearable and easygoing, and it appeals more to a younger audience. So in 2020, Louise Turner went on to formulate a new fragrance for Mugler, and she formulated Angel Nova alongside Sonia Constant and also Quentin Bisch. When you think about the note structure to this one and also the other fragrances that were successful on the market at the time, this was formulated after things such as Delina, And this, of course, uses the lychee and the rose, but also paired with raspberry. This echoes a lot of other fragrances that were around at the time, but takes it to extremes. This is something that's bright, it's almost fluorescent, it's pink, and it's a fun kind of fragrance. It's something that's loud and bombastic. And this fragrance also features akagala wood in the base, and that really is something that makes this fragrance pretty much eternal. Also, akagala wood was a Givaudan trademarked ingredient, Angel Nova. So in 2021, Louise Turner went on to formulate a few fragrances for La Perla. Sadly, La Perla is undergoing a change of brand ownership, and that's meant that a lot of their fragrances are either unavailable or are discontinued. But Possibilities was the standout hit of the line at the time, and this again used Petalia, just like other Givaudan fragrances, just like a lot of Bisch's creations. This was a very fruity but bright floral rose fragrance, and it did very well for La Perla. But in 2021, an even bigger hit was coming for Louise Turner with Liquide Imaginaire's Blanche Bête. So Blanche Bête is a milky sweet floral vanilla musk with a touch of something almost coconutty, a phantom coconut and a phantom white chocolate to it. This fragrance really began a milky trend, and it's been extensively copied since. What's Louise Turner been up to recently? Well, this year she's formulated a new fragrance for Carolina Herrera called La Bomba. She did this alongside Bisch and also Christophe Renaud. So La Bomba is a dragon fruit fragrance, which is quite an unusual note in fragrance these days, but it's something I feel could be quite divisive. I think you're either going to love this one or hate it. I don't think there's going to be many people who are going to be on the fence for this one. Louise Turner has also formulated a few of the Atelier des Fleurs line from Chloe, and for the last fragrance she formulated, she did so in collaboration with Bisch, so that one was Cedrus Intense. Louise Turner has been quoted as saying that she finds modern perfumery very competitive, and she also is sort of known to not really enjoy that competitive element because she finds it very stressful. She especially says that she doesn't enjoy the internal competition with colleagues for particular commissions. She says that everything is very fast in perfumery and that clients are very demanding. Turner has also highlighted her unusual entry into the fragrance industry and basically has said that there's no way she would get into perfumery school nowadays. She says it's hugely competitive and she was incredibly lucky to get the break she did to enter the fragrance industry. So what does the future hold for Louise Turner? Well, in February this year, she was actually announced as the in-house perfumer for Caron. So Caron are a very old French perfume house that have been going for 120 years. And I think Louise Turner has almost been brought in to revitalise the brand. Caron only recently released her first creation, Atma, which is described as a white floral amber vanilla fragrance. Really only time will tell what Louise Turner's effect on the House of Caron's fortunes will be. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have enjoyed it, then please do press the like button and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. I have to say with Louise Turner, there wasn't as much information on her as there have been on other perfumers that I've profiled. And I do wonder whether there is still some sexism out there in the industry and whether that might be why I have struggled so much to profile her as a perfumer. Maybe she's just more of a private person. Maybe she doesn't give as many interviews as other perfumers might do. But I was really surprised by the lack of information out there on her creations and even on her. So please do let me know if you own any fragrances formulated by Louise Turner and which is your favourite Louise Turner creation. I'd love to know. So thank you so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.